At exactly 2:47 in the morning, Joon Kang, heir to one of Seoul's most feared criminal empires, made a phone call that would destroy both their lives. Not to his army of bodyguards, not to his family's network of fixers and lawyers, to Elara Quinn, the only person left in the world who still saw him as human. 3 days after his grandmother's funeral, the old woman's final will detonated like a grenade inside the Seokang estate. Marry within 6 months and stay married for 5 years, or watch the empire collapse into his cousin's blood-soaked hands. Then Elara whispered the most dangerous words she'd ever spoken. Marry me. If you want to see how a fake marriage between a mafia boss and the woman who secretly loved him for 13 years becomes the most dangerous gamble of their lives, stay until the end. Hit like and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Joon Kang's penthouse like bullets ricocheting off armored glass. Elara stood in the private elevator, watching the numbers climb toward the 53rd floor, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Security had waved her through without question. They always did. She'd been Joon's best friend since they were kids, running wild through her father's restaurant kitchen in Busan, back before the Seokang family dragged him into the machinery of organized crime and turned him into something cold and untouchable. The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse. No hallway, no neighbors, just brutal wealth and isolation. She found him sitting in the dark. The entire living room stretched out like a cave carved from marble and steel, lit only by the city glow bleeding through rain-streaked windows. Joon sat motionless on the leather couch, still wearing the black suit from the funeral. His jacket hung open. His tie had been loosened hours ago and now dangled around his neck like a noose someone had started tying and then abandoned. You came, he said without looking at her. You called, Elara said quietly, stepping inside. The elevator doors whispered shut behind her, sealing them in together. She crossed the massive room and sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. They'd sat like this 1,000 times before. On her ratty apartment couch during college, when he'd shown up bleeding after gang wars he refused to talk about. On hospital benches when her mother got sick. On the roof of his first legitimate office building the night he told her he was being groomed to take over the family empire and there was no way out. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Joon looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump or turn around. She's really gone, he said finally. Elara reached over and took his hand. His knuckles were scarred from years of violence he'd tried to hide from her and failed. She laced her fingers through his anyway. I know. The funeral was a performance, Joon continued, his voice flat and distant. Half the people there wanted to see if I'd cry. The other half were calculating how fast they could move against me now that she's not here to protect me anymore. Your family's fucked up, Elara said bluntly. For the first time that night, the corner of Joon's mouth twitched upward, almost a smile. You've been saying that since we were 16. I've been right since we were 16. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain and the distant hum of Seoul's nightlife far below. Elara studied his profile in the darkness, the sharp line of his jaw, the exhaustion carved into his face, the way his eyes stayed fixed on nothing at all. She'd memorized that face years ago, every angle, every scar, every micro-expression that revealed what he was really thinking beneath the ice-cold persona he wore for everyone else. She'd been in love with him since she was 19 years old. He had no idea. There's something else, Joon said quietly. Elara's stomach dropped. She knew that tone. It was the same voice he used right before telling her something that would upend her entire world. The will, he said. What about it? They're reading it tomorrow. My grandmother left instructions. He turned to look at her finally, and Elara saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, something worse. Desperation. I need you there. Of course I'll be there. No. Joon's hand tightened around hers. I need you there, Elara. In the room. Sitting next to me. I can't do this alone. You're not alone, she said firmly. You've never been alone. But even as she said it, Elara knew it was a lie. Joon had been alone his entire life, surrounded by people who wanted to use him or destroy him or both. She was the only exception, the only person who'd ever chosen him without wanting something in return. At least that's what she told herself. Because the truth was more complicated. The truth was that she'd stayed beside him for 13 years, hoping someday he'd look at her and see more than just his childhood best friend. More than the girl who'd grown up in the background of his brutal, glittering world. More than the safe, comfortable person he called at 2:47 in the morning when everything fell apart. But Joon had never looked at her that way. He'd never touched her the way he touched the women he brought to charity galas. Beautiful, sophisticated, perfectly polished women who understood the rules of his world and played the game without flinching. Elara didn't belong in that world. She was a freelance translator who lived in a small apartment in Hongdae and spent her weekends reading in coffee shops. She wore jeans and oversized sweaters. She didn't know how to walk in heels higher than 2 inches. She'd never even been to one of the Seokong family's legendary parties because Joon kept that part of his life carefully separated from her, like he was protecting her or hiding her. "Promise me you'll be there tomorrow," Joon said again. "I promise." He exhaled slowly and leaned back against the couch, pulling her with him until her head rested against his shoulder. It should have felt natural. They'd done this before, but tonight, Elara's heart was racing so fast she was sure he could feel it. "Thank you," Joon murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For not running." Elara closed her eyes and tried to ignore the way her chest ached. "Where would I run to?" She felt him smile against the top of her head. "Anywhere that makes sense. Anywhere normal." Normal's overrated. They stayed like that until the rain stopped and the city lights began to blur together in the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, Joon fell asleep with his head tipped back against the couch, and Elara still tucked against his side. She didn't move. She barely breathed. She just memorized the weight of his arm around her shoulders and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and told herself this was enough. It had to be enough, because wanting more would destroy them both. The Seokong family estate sat behind 20-foot walls in Gangnam, surrounded by security checkpoints and surveillance cameras disguised as decorative lighting. Elara had only been here twice before. Once for a formal dinner when she was 22, and once when Joon's grandmother had summoned her for tea and spent 2 hours asking pointed questions about Elara's family, her education, her intentions. That conversation still haunted her, because Joon's grandmother had looked at her with those sharp, knowing eyes and said, "You love my grandson." It wasn't a question. Elara had frozen, her teacup halfway to her mouth, her heart slamming against her ribs. "He doesn't see it yet," the old woman had continued calmly. "But you do. And someday that will matter more than you realize." Then she'd changed the subject to the weather and never mentioned it again. Now, 3 days after the funeral, Elara sat in the back of Joon's armored Mercedes as it rolled through the estate gates. 2 black SUVs followed behind them, filled with security. Joon sat beside her in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elara's rent for 6 months, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the approaching mansion. "You okay?" Elara asked quietly. "No." At least he was honest. The car stopped in front of the main entrance, where staff in black uniforms waited to open doors and escort them inside. Joon stepped out first, buttoning his suit jacket with mechanical precision. Then he turned and offered Elara his hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and for just a second his expression softened. "Stay close to me," he said under his breath. "Always." They walked into their mansion together, through hallways lined with priceless art and fresh white flowers that probably cost more than a small car. The reading of the will was taking place in the old woman's private study, a room Elara had never seen before. Joon's hand stayed locked around hers the entire walk, like he was anchoring himself to her. When they reached the study, the door was already open. Inside, the Seokong family had gathered like vultures circling a fresh corpse. Joon's father sat near the window, stone-faced and silent, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits. His uncles occupied the remaining chairs, whispering to each other in rapid Korean. And there, standing near the massive mahogany desk like she already owned it, was Naomi Seokang, Joon's cousin. Elara had only met her once, at that formal dinner years ago, but she'd never forgotten the way Naomi looked at her, like Elara was a stain on expensive fabric that needed to be removed. Naomi was beautiful in a way that felt weaponized. Razor-sharp cheekbones, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, a black dress that probably came from a Paris runway and fit her like a second skin. She smiled when Joon walked in, but her eyes stayed cold. "Joon," she said smoothly, "I'm so glad you made it. And you brought a guest." Her gaze flicked to Elara like she was noticing an insect. "Elara's not a guest," Joon said flatly. "She's with me." "How lovely." Naomi's smile didn't waver. "Though I'm not sure why she needs to be here for a private family matter. My grandmother invited her." That shut Naomi up, but only for a second. Then she laughed softly and turned back to the desk, where the family attorney was organizing documents. "Well, let's not keep grandmother waiting, shall we?" Joon led Elara to a small sofa near the back of the room and sat down beside her, still holding her hand. His thumb brushed absently across her knuckles. It was a tiny gesture, probably unconscious, but it made Elara's entire body go warm. The attorney cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began in Korean. Elara understood enough to follow along, though Joon leaned close and translated the important parts under his breath anyway. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Seokang Cha, matriarch of the Seokang family." The room went silent. "Before we begin, I must note that Mrs. Seokang was of sound mind and body when she drafted this document 6 months ago. She made her intentions very clear." Naomi leaned forward slightly, her eyes glittering. The attorney opened a leather portfolio and began reading. Most of it was standard: charitable donations, gifts to loyal staff, family heirlooms distributed among relatives. Then he got to the part that made everyone sit up straighter. "To my grandson, Seokang Joon," the attorney read carefully, "I leave controlling interest in all family holdings, including Seokang Enterprises, the associated subsidiaries, and the complete network of business operations built over 3 generations." Joon's hand went rigid around Elara's. "However," the attorney continued, and Elara felt the air in the room change instantly, "this inheritance is conditional." "Conditional?" Joon's father spoke for the first time, his voice sharp. "On what?" The attorney looked directly at Joon. "Mr. Seokang must be married within 6 months of his grandmother's death. The marriage must remain legally intact for a minimum of 5 consecutive years. If either condition is not met, controlling interest in all family holdings will transfer to Naomi Seokang." The room exploded. Joon's uncle started shouting in Korean. His father stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. Naomi's expression shifted from shock to barely concealed triumph in less than 3 seconds. But Joon didn't move. He just sat there, still holding Elara's hand, staring at nothing. "This is ridiculous," one of the uncles was yelling. "She can't impose conditions like this." The will is legally binding, the attorney said calmly. Mrs. Seokang had the document reviewed by 3 independent law firms. It will hold up in any court. 6 months, Joon's father said quietly, and the room went silent again. He turned to look at his son. "Can you do it?" Joon's jaw clenched. "I don't know." "You don't know?" Naomi's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Joon, darling, either you can find someone willing to marry you in 6 months and stay married for 5 years, or you can't. It's not complicated." "Nothing about this is simple," Joon said coldly. Naomi smiled. "No, I suppose it's not. After all, what kind of woman would agree to marry into this family? Especially someone like you. Cold, dangerous, emotionally unavailable." Her eyes flicked to Elara for just a second. "Unless, of course, you already have someone in mind." The implication hung in the air like poison. Elara felt her face go hot. She tried to pull her hand away from Joon's, but his grip tightened. He still wasn't looking at anyone. He was staring at the floor like he was trying to burn a hole through it with his eyes alone. "The 6-month period begins today," the attorney said. "If Mr. Seokang wishes to contest the will, he has 30 days to file the appropriate paperwork. Otherwise, the conditions stand." "He won't contest it," Joon's father said flatly. "Will you, son?" Joon finally looked up. His expression was completely unreadable. "No." "Good." His father nodded once, then turned and walked out of the room without another word. The uncles followed, still muttering to each other in angry Korean. The attorneys began packing up their documents. Within 3 minutes, the only people left in the study were Joon, Elara, and Naomi. Naomi stood by the desk, watching them with a predatory smile. 6 months, she said softly. That's not very long, Joon, especially when you consider that most of the women who'd be willing to marry you are only interested in the money. And you'd have to trust them enough to stay married for 5 full years without taking everything you own and walking away. Get out, Joon said quietly. I'm just being realistic. Get out. Something in his voice made Naomi's smile falter. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked toward the door. But she paused on her way out and looked back at Elara. You know, Naomi said thoughtfully, if I were Joon, I'd be very careful about who I trusted right now. Desperation makes people do strange things, even best friends. Then she was gone. The door closed with a soft click. Elara and Joon sat in silence. Her hand was still locked in his. Finally, Elara said, Joon, I need to think. His voice sounded hollow. I need to think. Okay. But he didn't move. He didn't let go of her hand. He just sat there, staring at the place where his grandmother's portrait hung on the wall, a beautiful oil painting of a woman who'd built an empire through blood and brilliance and had apparently decided to blow it all up with one final impossible condition. She knew, Joon said suddenly. Knew what? That I'd never be able to do this, that I don't trust anyone enough to marry them, that I'm... He stopped and shook his head. She knew exactly what she was doing. Elara's heart was hammering now. Maybe she thought, what? That I'd magically find someone who could tolerate being married to a criminal for 5 years? Someone who wouldn't sell me out the second things got complicated? Joon laughed, but it sounded broken. My grandmother was brilliant, Elara, but this is a death sentence wrapped in legal paperwork. There has to be someone. There isn't. Joon finally turned to look at her, and Elara saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. Everyone I know either fears me, wants something from me, or both. There's no one I could trust with this. No one except... He stopped. His eyes went wide. Elara felt the exact moment the idea hit him, because his entire body went rigid and his hand tightened around hers so hard it almost hurt. No, she said immediately. Elara, absolutely not. Just listen. Joon, I know what you're thinking, and the answer is no. Elara tried to pull her hand away, but he held on. You can't. Why not? Because it's insane. Is it? Joon shifted to face her fully, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. You're the only person I trust, the only person who's never wanted anything from me except my friendship. You know me better than anyone. And we've been in each other's lives for 13 years, Elara finished quietly. I know. Then you know I'm right. Joon's voice was urgent now, almost pleading. This could work. It doesn't have to be real, just legal, just 5 years. And then what? Elara pulled her hand free finally and stood up, putting distance between them before she did something stupid like agree. We get divorced and pretend none of it ever happened? We go back to being best friends like nothing changed? Yes. You're delusional. I'm desperate. Joon stood too, closing the distance she'd just created. Elara, please. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm just asking you to help me survive this. 5 years, that's all. Elara looked up at him and felt her carefully constructed walls start to crumble. Because the truth was, she'd marry him in a heartbeat. She'd marry him tomorrow. She'd marry him for 5 years or 50 years or forever. But not like this. Not as a business arrangement. Not as a favor between friends. Not when he'd spend the entire 5 years looking at her and seeing nothing but a solution to his grandmother's impossible condition. I can't, she whispered. Joon's face fell. Why not? Because I love you, Elara thought. Because marrying you and pretending it means nothing would destroy me. But she couldn't say that. So instead she said, because you're my best friend, Joon, and I won't risk that, not even for you. She turned and walked toward the door before he could see the tears starting to burn behind her eyes. Her hand was on the handle when Joon's voice stopped her. What if I said I needed you? Elara froze. What if I said you're the only person I've ever needed? His voice was quiet now, almost broken. What would you say then? Elara closed her eyes and felt something inside her chest crack wide open. Then she turned around, looked at the man she'd loved for over a decade standing alone in his dead grandmother's study, and whispered the most dangerous words of her life. Then I'd say yes. Joon stared at her. I mean yes. I'll marry you. Elara's voice was shaking now, but she forced herself to keep going. 6 months, 5 years, whatever you need. I'll do it. For a moment, Joon looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Thank you, he said into her hair. God, Elara, thank you. Elara wrapped her arms around him and held on, her face pressed against his chest, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. She'd just agreed to marry the man she loved, and he had no idea. The wedding happened 4 days later in a private courthouse buried deep in Seoul's financial district, the kind of place where Korea's elite handled their most sensitive legal business behind bulletproof glass and armed security. No media, no flowers, no romance. Just Elara in a simple cream dress she'd bought the night before at a department store, and Joon in another one of his perfectly tailored suits, standing in front of a judge who looked like he'd performed this exact ceremony for dozens of wealthy families trying to hide marriages that were more transaction than union. 2 witnesses stood against the back wall. Joon's head of security and his primary attorney, both stone-faced and silent. Elara's hands were shaking when Joon slid the ring onto her finger. It was a simple platinum band, elegant and understated, exactly the kind of ring she would have chosen for herself if this were real. That detail made everything worse, because it meant Joon had been paying attention all these years. He'd noticed what she liked, what she wore, how she moved through the world. He'd noticed everything except the way she looked at him. The judge said something in Korean about legal obligations and marital duties. Joon translated under his breath, his voice flat and mechanical. Then came the part where they were supposed to kiss. Joon hesitated. It was barely a second, but Elara caught it. The tiny pause where he looked at her mouth like he was calculating acceptable boundaries between best friends who'd just signed legal documents binding them together for 5 years. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It was brief, chaste. The kind of kiss you'd give someone at a family reunion. It felt like swallowing glass. When they pulled apart, the judge declared them legally married and handed over the signed certificate. Joon's attorney immediately took possession of it, sliding it into a leather portfolio like evidence in a crime scene. Congratulations, the judge said without emotion. Elara wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. Instead, she let Joon take her hand and lead her out of the courthouse, through a back exit where 3 black SUVs waited to escort them back to the penthouse. Security formed a tight perimeter. Cameras flashed from somewhere across the street. Paparazzi who'd somehow gotten wind of the ceremony despite the secrecy. Joon's jaw tightened. Get her in the car. 2 bodyguards immediately surrounded Elara, blocking her from view as they rushed her into the middle vehicle. Joon climbed in beside her a second later, and the convoy pulled away from the curb with the precision of a military extraction. They rode in silence for 10 minutes. Elara stared at the ring on her finger and tried to remember how to breathe. I'm sorry about the photographers, Joon said finally. It's fine. It's not fine. I should have anticipated. Joon. Elara turned to look at him. It's fine, really. But nothing about this was fine. She'd just married her best friend in a loveless courthouse ceremony to help him secure a criminal empire, and now she was being driven through Seoul in an armored vehicle surrounded by men with guns. This was her life now. For the next 5 years, this was her life. Joon was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Are you okay? Are you? He didn't answer. The convoy pulled up to his building 20 minutes later, a gleaming tower in Gangnam that housed some of Seoul's wealthiest residents. They rode the private elevator up to the 53rd floor in silence. When the doors opened directly into Joon's penthouse, Elara stepped inside and felt the weight of reality settle over her like concrete. This was her home now. She'd been here 100 times before, but always as a guest, always with the knowledge that she'd leave at the end of the night and go back to her small apartment in Hongdae where she belonged. Now she was married to the man who owned this place, married to her best friend, married to someone who'd kissed her like a legal obligation. Your things should be here by tomorrow, Joon said, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over the back of the couch. I had your apartment packed up this morning. Everything will be moved into the guest room unless you want— The guest room is fine, Joon paused. Right, yes, of course. Another silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Elara had never felt this awkward around Joon in her entire life. They'd always been easy with each other, natural. But now there was this new weight between them, this legal contract that had turned 13 years of friendship into something strange and brittle. I should probably call my parents, Elara said finally. They're going to hear about this eventually. Do you want me to talk to them? And say what? Hi, I married your daughter in a secret courthouse ceremony to secure my inheritance from a criminal empire? Joon winced. When you put it like that, that's exactly what happened. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling for the first time all day. I know I've asked you to do something insane, but I promise I'll make it as easy as possible. You won't have to change anything about your life. You can keep working, keep your friends, keep everything exactly the same. This is just legal paperwork, Elara finished quietly. I know. But it wasn't just legal paperwork. It was waking up every morning knowing she was married to the man she loved, and he'd never see her as anything more than the friend who'd helped him survive an impossible situation. Joon was still watching her with that unreadable expression. You can back out, he said suddenly. What? If this is too much, if you've changed your mind, we can get it annulled before— I'm not backing out. Elara, I said I'd do this and I will. She met his eyes and forced her voice to stay steady. 5 years. That was the deal. Joon looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just nodded. Okay, thank you. Stop thanking me. I can't help it. Try. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Yes, ma'am. That small moment of levity broke something open between them. The awkwardness didn't disappear completely, but it shifted into something more manageable. Something that felt almost like their old friendship, just wrapped in legal documents and wearing a wedding ring. Elara exhaled slowly. I need a drink. I'll get the whiskey. 2 weeks into the marriage, Elara woke up at 6 in the morning and found Joon in the kitchen making coffee. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom, the guest room that had somehow become her permanent residence, and watched him move through the space with practiced efficiency. He was already dressed in workout clothes, his hair damp from a shower, his movements precise and controlled. He'd been doing this every morning since she moved in, making her coffee exactly the way she liked it. Extra foam, light sugar, a specific temperature that required him to let it cool for exactly 3 minutes after brewing. The first time it happened, Elara had assumed it was a coincidence. By the 5th day, she'd realized it was deliberate. By the 10th day, it was starting to break her heart. Because Joon was taking care of her in all the small domestic ways that made this fake marriage feel dangerously real. He waited up when she worked late translating documents for her clients. He ordered her favorite takeout without asking when she had rough days. He left post-it notes on the bathroom mirror, reminding her about appointments she'd mentioned in passing. He did all the things a real husband would do. Except touch her. Except look at her like he wanted her. Except kiss her the way he'd kissed her at the courthouse. Like he was checking off a box on a legal form. Elara pushed off the doorframe and walked into the kitchen, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she slept in. Joon glanced up, and his expression softened. Morning. Morning. Elara slid onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Nightmares? Something like that. Joon poured coffee into her favorite mug, a chipped ceramic thing she'd had since college that looked completely out of place in his pristine, expensive kitchen. He slid it across the counter to her. I have a meeting at 8 with the board. They want to discuss the transition. Elara wrapped her hands around the mug. Are they giving you trouble? Not yet, but Naomi's been making noise, spreading rumors that the marriage isn't real. Is she wrong? Joon's eyes snapped to hers. What? The marriage isn't real, Elara said quietly. It's a legal contract, that's all. Something flickered across Joon's face, something that looked almost like hurt. but it disappeared so fast Elara thought she'd imagined it. "The marriage is legal," he said carefully. "That makes it real in the only way that matters. For the inheritance, you mean?" "Yes." Elara took a sip of coffee and tried to ignore the way her chest ached. "Right, of course." Joon was still watching her, his expression unreadable. "You sound upset." "I'm not upset." Elara said, "I'm fine, Joon, really." She forced a smile. "Just tired. I had a late night with that translation project." It was a lie, but Joon didn't push. He never pushed. That was part of the problem. He treated her like something fragile that might shatter if he pressed too hard, and Elara was starting to resent it. She wasn't fragile. She was in love with him. There was a difference. Joon's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, and his jaw tightened. "I need to go. The car's waiting downstairs." "Okay." He grabbed his suit jacket from the back of a chair and shrugged it on, transforming from the man who made her coffee every morning into the cold, untouchable heir to a criminal empire. It was like watching him put on armor, but then he paused at the door and looked back at her. "Elara?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For being here." His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "For not running." Then he was gone. Elara sat alone in the kitchen, staring at her coffee, and felt tears burn behind her eyes. She'd told him to stop thanking her, but he kept doing it anyway, like he still couldn't believe she'd chosen to stay. Quote, 3 weeks into the marriage, Naomi showed up at the penthouse. Elara was working at the dining room table, her laptop open and a stack of translation documents spread out in front of her, when security called from the lobby to inform her that Naomi Seokang was on her way to Yup. "Did Joon approve this?" Elara asked. "Miss Seokang has permanent clearance," the security guard said. "Should I turn her away?" Elara closed her eyes and counted to 3. "No, let her up." 2 minutes later, Naomi stepped out of the elevator wearing a blood-red dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Elara," she said warmly, "how lovely to see you again." "Naomi." Elara closed her laptop and stood up. "Joon's not here." "I know. I came to see you." That was worse. Naomi crossed the living room with the confidence of someone who'd been here 100 times before. She probably had. Before the marriage, before the will, Naomi had been part of Joon's world in ways Elara never was. "Can I get you something to drink?" Elara asked, defaulting to politeness because she had no idea what else to do. "No, thank you." Naomi settled onto the couch like she owned it. "This won't take long. I just wanted to have a little chat, woman to woman." Elara's stomach dropped. "About what?" "About my cousin. And this marriage." Naomi's eyes glittered. "You must be very proud of yourself." "Excuse me?" "I mean, it's quite the accomplishment, convincing one of Korea's most powerful men to marry you in less than a week." Naomi leaned back and crossed her legs. "Most women spend years trying to get Joon's attention. But you? You managed to lock him down with a contract before he had time to think clearly." Elara's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't convince him of anything." "No? Then what would you call it?" "I'd call it helping a friend." Naomi laughed. "A friend? How sweet." She tilted her head, studying Elara like she was a specimen under glass. "Tell me something, Elara. Do you really think this marriage is going to last 5 years?" "That's the plan." "Plans change, especially when people realize they've made a mistake." Naomi's smile sharpened. "And Joon will realize it, eventually. He'll wake up one morning and understand that he's trapped himself in a loveless marriage with someone who doesn't belong in his world, someone who can't handle the pressure, someone who's going to break." "I'm not going to break. Everyone breaks, darling. It's just a matter of time." Elara forced herself to stay calm. "Is there a point to this conversation, or did you just come here to be cruel?" "I came here to make you an offer." Naomi leaned forward. "Walk away now, quietly. I'll make sure you're compensated generously for your trouble. Enough money that you'll never have to work another day in your life. And if I refuse, then things will get very uncomfortable for you." Naomi's voice went cold. "I have resources, Elara. Investigators, lawyers. People who know how to dig up every secret you've ever kept. And when they find something, and they will find something, I'll make sure Joon sees exactly what kind of person he married. Elara's heart was pounding now, but she kept her voice steady. You won't find anything. Everyone has secrets. Not me. Naomi studied her for a long moment, then smiled. We'll see. She stood up and smoothed the front of her dress. Think about my offer, Elara, because this is the only time I'm going to be nice about it. Next time, I won't ask. Then she walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and disappeared behind the closing doors. Elara stood alone in the penthouse, shaking. She wanted to call Joon, wanted to tell him what Naomi had said, what she'd threatened, but something stopped her. Because part of her wondered if Naomi was right. What if Joon did wake up one day and realize he'd made a mistake? What if 5 years was too long to pretend? What if this whole arrangement collapsed and took their friendship down with it? Elara sank back down into her chair and stared at her laptop without seeing it. She'd thought marrying Joon would be the hardest part, but surviving the marriage was going to be so much worse. 4 weeks into the marriage, Joon started coming home late. The first time it happened, he texted to let her know he'd been held up at a meeting. The second time, he didn't text at all. By the end of the week, Elara found herself eating dinner alone at the dining room table, staring at her phone and trying not to feel abandoned. When Joon finally came home, usually after midnight, he'd head straight to his bedroom without stopping to talk. The next morning, he'd be up early making her coffee like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The easy domesticity they'd built during the first 3 weeks was crumbling. Joon was pulling away, retreating back into the cold, distant version of himself that everyone else saw. And Elara had no idea how to stop it. One night, she waited up for him. It was almost 2 a.m. when she heard the elevator doors open. Joon stepped into the penthouse looking exhausted. His tie was loosened, his jacket was slung over one arm. There were dark circles under his eyes. "You're still awake," he said when he saw her sitting on the couch. "Where were you?" "Working." "Until 2 a.m? Joon's jaw tightened. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it." Elara stood up. "You've been disappearing every night for a week. No explanation, no communication. Just gone." "I told you I was working. Don't lie to me." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusing. Joon's expression went cold. "I'm not lying." "Then what were you doing?" "That's none of your business." Elara flinched like he'd slapped her. "None of my business. I'm your wife." "You're my friend who agreed to sign legal documents," Joon said flatly. "That doesn't give you the right to interrogate me about where I go or who I see." "Who you see?" Elara's voice went quiet. "Is there someone else?" Joon's eyes widened. "What? No, Elara, that's not... Because if there is, you need to tell me. We might not be in love, but we're legally married. If you're seeing someone..." "I'm not seeing anyone." Joon ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding into his voice. "There's no one else. There's never been anyone else. It's just... I've been dealing with some things." "What things?" "Family things, business things, things that are dangerous and complicated, and I don't want you anywhere near them. So you shut me out instead?" "Yes!" Joon's voice cracked. "Yes, I shut you out because that's what I do, Elara. I keep the people I care about away from the ugliest parts of my life so they don't get hurt. I'm not fragile. I know that." "Then stop treating me like I am." Elara stepped closer, her hands shaking. "You asked me to marry you. You asked me to be part of your life. But you're still keeping me at arm's length like I'm some civilian who can't handle the truth." "You are a civilian," Joon said quietly. "You don't belong in my world." "I'm in your world now. I married into it. Only because I forced you to." The words hit Elara like a punch to the stomach. "You didn't force me." "Didn't I?" Joon looked at her with something that might have been guilt or regret or both. "I cornered you in my grandmother's study when you were emotionally vulnerable and asked you to give up 5 years of your life to save me. How is that not forcing you? Because I chose to say yes." "You said yes because you're a good person who can't stand to see people suffer, even when they don't deserve your help." Elara stared at him. "Is that really what you think? That I married you out of pity?" "Didn't you?" "No." Elara's voice was shaking now. barely controlled. I married you because... She stopped. Because I love you. Because I've been in love with you since I was 19 years old. Because I'd rather spend 5 years pretending to be your wife than spend another day watching you from the sidelines. But she couldn't say that. So instead she said, I married you because you're my best friend, and I'd do anything for you, even this. Joon looked away. I don't deserve you. That's not your decision to make. They stood in silence for a long moment, the space between them feeling wider than the entire penthouse. Finally, Joon said, I'm sorry for disappearing, for shutting you out. I'm not good at this. At what? At being married. At letting someone in. He met her eyes again. At being anything other than alone. Elara's chest ached. You're not alone anymore. I know. Joon's voice was barely a whisper. That's what scares me. Then he walked past her toward his bedroom, and Elara stood in the middle of the living room, wondering how they'd gone from making coffee together every morning to feeling like strangers living in the same house. Back. 6 weeks into the marriage, Elara saw the photographs. They arrived in a plain manila envelope slipped under the penthouse door while Joon was at work. No return address. No note. Just a stack of 8x10 glossy prints that made Elara's blood run cold. Joon with a woman. The photos were taken at night outside a high-end hotel in Seoul's business district. In the first image, they were standing close together under the building's entrance awning. In the second, the woman's hand was on Joon's arm. In the third, they were walking into the hotel together. The woman was beautiful, elegant in a way Elara would never be, wearing a tailored dress that probably cost more than Elara's entire wardrobe. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her posture screamed confidence and sophistication. She looked like she belonged in Joon's world. Elara dropped the photos on the dining room table and pressed her hands flat against the surface to stop them from shaking. This was what he'd been doing. All those late nights, all those disappearances, all those lies about working. He'd been with her. The rational part of Elara's brain knew she had no right to be upset. This was a fake marriage, a business arrangement. Joon didn't owe her fidelity. He didn't owe her anything except 5 years of legal documentation. But the other part, the part that had been in love with him for 13 years, felt like she was being ripped apart from the inside. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and pulled up the tracking information Joon had shared with her after they got married. For safety, he'd said, so you always know where I am in case something happens. The tracking showed him at a building in downtown Seoul, the same hotel from the photographs. Elara stared at the screen for a long time. Then she grabbed her jacket and headed for the elevator. The hotel was exactly as expensive and exclusive as the photos suggested. Elara walked through the marble lobby feeling completely out of place in her jeans and sneakers, but the staff didn't stop her. Maybe they assumed she belonged. Maybe they didn't care. She took the elevator up to the 18th floor, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Joon's tracking placed him in room 1847. Elara stood outside the door for a full minute, her hand raised to knock, her entire body trembling. She should turn around. She should go home. She should remember that this was a fake marriage and she had no right to feel betrayed. But instead she knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. And Joon stood there, looking completely shocked to see her. Elara? What are you... She shoved the photographs into his chest. Who is she? Joon looked down at the photos and his face went pale. Where did you get these? They were delivered to the penthouse. Who is she, Joon? It's not what it looks like. Then what is it? Elara's voice was rising now, all her careful control slipping away. Because it looks like you've been sneaking around with another woman while I sit at home alone wondering why my husband can't stand to be in the same room with me anymore. Elara, don't. She stepped back, her eyes burning. Don't lie to me, not about this. Joon ran a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, defeated. Come inside, please, let me explain. I don't want to come inside. Elara, please. Something in his voice made her pause. Not the cold, controlled tone he used for business. Not the careful distance he'd been maintaining for weeks. Just raw, desperate honesty. She stepped inside. The hotel room was a suite, elegantly furnished, overlooking the city. and sitting on the couch near the window was the woman from the photographs. She looked up when Elara walked in, and Elara saw kindness in her eyes. Not guilt, not smugness, just gentle understanding. "Mrs. Seokang," the woman said softly. "It's nice to finally meet you." Elara looked at Joon. "What's going on?" "This is Dr. Park Min-ji," Joon said quietly. "She's my therapist." Elara blinked. "You're... what?" "My therapist." Joon's hands were shaking now. "I've been seeing her 3 times a week for the past month. That's where I've been going. That's why I've been coming home late." "You're in therapy?" "Yes." Elara looked between Joon and Dr. Park, trying to process this information. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed." Joon's voice cracked. "Because admitting I needed help felt like admitting weakness. And I couldn't..." He stopped and pressed his hands against his eyes. "I couldn't let you see me like that." Dr. Park stood up gracefully. "I'll give you two some privacy." She looked at Elara. "For what it's worth, your husband has been working very hard. You should be proud of him." Then she slipped past them and left the suite, closing the door quietly behind her. Elara and Joon stood in the middle of the room, the photographs scattered on the floor between them. "Why?" Elara said finally. "Why therapy? Why now?" Joon was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I'm in love with you." Elara's entire world stopped. "I've been in love with you since I was 17 years old," Joon continued, his voice raw and broken. "Since the night you patched up my knuckles after my first real fight and told me I was still a good person underneath all the violence. And for 13 years I convinced myself it was enough to just be near you, to be your friend, to exist in your life in whatever way you'd allow." Tears were streaming down Elara's face now. "But then I married you," Joon said, "and suddenly you were in my home every day, making coffee in my kitchen, falling asleep on my couch, wearing my clothes when you got cold, and I realized that being near you wasn't enough anymore. It was torture. Every single second of pretending this marriage meant nothing was destroying me. Joon, so I found a therapist." He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "Because I thought if I could just learn how to cope with loving someone who would never love me back, maybe I could survive the next 5 years without losing my mind." Elara was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "You think I don't love you?" Joon looked at her like she'd just spoken a foreign language. "What? You think I married you out of pity? Out of friendship?" Elara stepped closer, her voice breaking. "Joon, I've been in love with you since I was 19 years old, since the night you showed up at my apartment bleeding and broken and let me see you as something more than the cold Mafia air everyone else sees. I've loved you for over a decade, and marrying you has been the best and worst thing that ever happened to me because I get to be your wife, but you don't even..." She didn't get to finish, because Joon crossed the space between them and kissed her. It wasn't careful or controlled or anything like the chaste kiss at the courthouse. It was desperate and raw, and 13 years of suppressed longing exploding all at once. Elara kissed him back with everything she had, her hands fisting in his shirt, tears streaming down her face. Joon backed her against the wall, his hands framing her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Joon pressed his forehead against hers. "Tell me I'm not dreaming," he whispered. "You're not dreaming. Tell me you mean it, that you really..." "I love you," Elara said fiercely. "I love you so much it terrifies me." Joon kissed her again, softer this time, like he was savoring it. "I love you too. God, Elara, I love you so much." They stood there for a long time, wrapped around each other in a hotel suite overlooking Seoul, finally admitting the truth they'd both been carrying for over a decade. The fake marriage was over, but something infinitely more dangerous had just begun. They didn't leave the hotel suite for 3 hours. Elara sat curled against Joon on the couch overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They talked in whispers like they were afraid speaking too loud might shatter whatever fragile reality they'd just created. "How long have you been seeing Dr. Park?" Elara asked, tracing absent patterns on his shirt. 5 weeks. Since the night you confronted me about disappearing." Joon's fingers moved through her hair slowly, carefully, like he was still testing whether he was allowed to touch her this way. "I realized I was destroying us by shutting you out. But I didn't know how to let you in without falling apart completely. You should have told me. I know, He exhaled slowly. I've spent my whole life being the person everyone else needs me to be. Cold, controlled, untouchable. The idea of admitting I was barely holding it together felt impossible. Elara tilted her head back to look at him. You don't have to be that person with me. You never did. I'm starting to understand that. Joon kissed her forehead gently. Dr. Park's been helping me figure out how to be honest, about what I want, about what scares me, about you. What about me? Everything about you. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I was terrified that if you knew how I really felt, I'd lose you completely, that you'd look at me differently, that our friendship would die, and I'd be left with nothing. So you married me instead? Joon laughed quietly. When you put it that way, it sounds insane. It is insane. I know. He pulled her closer. But I'd do it again, every time, even if you'd never felt the same way. Elara's chest ached with something too big to name. We wasted so much time. We had to find our way here somehow. Still, 13 years, Joon. I know. He pressed his lips against her temple. But we're here now. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a while longer, wrapped around each other, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just shifted between them. The fake marriage built on contracts and obligations had just transformed into something real and terrifying and completely uncharted. Eventually, Joon's phone buzzed with a message from security asking if everything was all right. Reality came crashing back in. We should go home, Elara said reluctantly. Not yet. Joon's arms tightened around her. Just a few more minutes. So they stayed. Because both of them knew that once they left this suite and went back to the penthouse, back to the world where Naomi was circling and the family was watching and the 5-year contract still hung over them like a guillotine, everything would become infinitely more complicated. But eventually, they had to leave anyway. The ride back to the penthouse was different than every other ride they'd taken together over the past 6 weeks. Joon held her hand the entire way, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in slow, deliberate strokes. Every time Elara glanced at him, he was already looking at her with an expression that made her stomach flip. Like he couldn't believe she was real. Like he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away. When they got back to the penthouse, Joon walked her to the guest room door and paused. You don't have to sleep in here anymore, he said quietly. If you don't want to. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Where would I sleep? With me? Joon's voice was rough. In my room, in my bed, where you should have been from the beginning. Heat flooded through Elara's entire body. Joon? Only if you want to, he added quickly. I'm not trying to pressure you, I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to sleep 10 feet away from you knowing you're the only thing I've ever wanted. Elara reached up and pulled him down into a kiss that answered the question without words. They barely made it to his bedroom. Joon kissed her like he was drowning and she was air, backing her through the doorway, his hands tangled in her hair. Elara's fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against hers, to prove this was real and not another dream she'd wake up from alone. When they finally collapsed onto his bed hours later, tangled together and breathing hard, Elara pressed her face against Joon's chest and listened to his heartbeat slow. I love you, she whispered. Joon's arms tightened around her. I love you too. And for the first time in 6 weeks, Elara fell asleep feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. The next 2 weeks were the happiest of Elara's entire life. Joon stopped disappearing. He came home early. He kissed her in the kitchen while making coffee. He held her hand at dinner. He pulled her into his lap while they watched movies on the couch. He looked at her the way she'd dreamed about for 13 years, like she was the center of his entire universe. They moved her things into his bedroom. Her books ended up on his nightstand. Her clothes mixed with his in the closet. The guest room sat empty, a reminder of the fake marriage that no longer existed. Everything felt perfect. Too perfect. Elara should have known it wouldn't last. Bet. The photographs arrived on a Tuesday morning while Joon was in a board meeting. Elara found them on the dining room table when she came out of the bedroom. A new manila envelope, identical to the first one, containing a fresh stack of 8 by 10 prints. But these photos were different. These photos were of her and Joon, leaving the hotel together the night she'd confronted him about Dr. Park, kissing against the wall in the suite, walking into the penthouse lobby with his arm around her waist, standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, her wearing his shirt, him kissing her forehead. Someone had been watching them. Someone had been documenting every moment of their relationship becoming real. Elara's hands shook as she flipped through the images. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note on expensive cardstock. These will be delivered to the Seokong family attorney by the end of the week, unless you withdraw from the marriage immediately. The contract stated Joon must remain married for 5 years. It said nothing about the marriage being based on genuine affection. If the board discovers this started as fraud, they'll invalidate the entire inheritance, and Naomi will take control of everything. You have 72 hours. Make the right choice. There was no signature, but Elara knew exactly who'd sent it. She was still staring at the photos when Joon came home 3 hours later. He walked through the door smiling, already loosening his tie, calling her name. Then he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Elara handed him the envelope without speaking. She watched the color drain from Joon's face as he looked through the photographs, watched his jaw clench tighter with each image, watched his hands start to shake when he read the note. "Naomi," he said flatly. "She's going to destroy us." Elara's voice was hollow. "She's going to prove the marriage was fraudulent and take everything." "She can't prove anything. The marriage is legal." "But it wasn't real when we signed the papers. That's what she'll argue. That we committed fraud to secure your inheritance." Elara stood up, pacing. "She has documentation now. Photos proving we weren't in love when we got married. Evidence that this whole thing was a scheme." Joon set the photos down carefully. "We'll fight it." "How?" "She's right, Joon. We did lie. We signed those papers knowing this wasn't a real marriage. It is real now." "That doesn't matter," Elara's voice cracked. "The contract was based on fraud. Any lawyer will tear it apart in minutes." "So we tell the truth," Joon said desperately. "We tell them we fell in love after the marriage, that it became real." "You think they'll believe that? You think your family's board of directors will accept that the marriage conveniently became genuine right after the inheritance transferred?" Elara pressed her hands against her face. "This is over. Naomi wins." "No." Joon crossed the room and grabbed her shoulders. "No, she doesn't win. I won't let her. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice." Elara looked up at him and saw something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Something cold and ruthless that reminded her exactly who Joon Seokong really was beneath the man who made her coffee every morning. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "I'm thinking that Naomi made a mistake." Joon's voice had gone flat and lethal. "She threatened the only thing that matters to me, and I'm going to make sure she regrets it." "Joon, don't!" "This isn't your fight anymore, Elara. This is between me and my family." He kissed her forehead quickly, then stepped back. "Pack a bag. I'm sending you somewhere safe until this is over." "I'm not leaving you." "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do." Elara grabbed his arm. "We're in this together. That's what marriage means. Real marriage. Not contracts or conditions or legal technicalities. Just two people choosing to stand beside each other no matter what happens." Joon looked at her for a long moment. "You could walk away right now. Take Naomi's deal. Disappear with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You'd be free of all of this." "I don't want to be free of you. Even if it means watching everything collapse?" Even then, something in Joon's expression cracked open. He pulled her against him and held on like he was trying to merge them into one person. "I don't deserve you." "Stop saying that. It's true." "It's not your decision to make," Elara said, echoing the words she'd told him weeks ago. Joon laughed quietly against her hair. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and his entire body went rigid. "We need to go now." "What? Why?" "Naomi just called an emergency family meeting, tonight, at the estate." Joon's jaw was clenched so tight Elara could see the muscle jumping. "She's making her move. Malkas." The Seokong estate was lit up like a fortress when they arrived. Security was tripled. Black SUVs lined the driveway. Men in dark suits stood at every entrance, their hands resting near concealed weapons. This wasn't a family meeting. This was a tribunal. Joon held Elara's hand as they walked through the front doors, his grip almost painful. He hadn't said a word during the entire drive. He just stared out the window with that cold, calculating expression that made him look like a stranger. They were escorted to the main conference room, a massive space with a table that could seat 30 people. Tonight, it was packed. Joon's father sat at the head. His uncles occupied the sides. The family attorney was present. Several board members from Seokong Enterprises filled the remaining chairs. And Naomi stood near the windows, wearing a white dress that made her look like a queen presiding over an execution. She smiled when Joon walked in. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "What is this?" Joon's voice was ice cold. "A reckoning." Naomi gestured to the empty chairs beside Joon's father. "Please, sit." Joon didn't move. "Get to the point." "Very well." Naomi walked to the table and placed a thick folder in front of Joon's father. "I have evidence that Joon's marriage to Elara Quinn was fraudulent from the beginning. They weren't in love when they signed the marriage certificate. They entered into a contract designed specifically to circumvent grandmother's will and secure the inheritance through deception." Joon's father opened the folder. His expression didn't change as he looked through the photographs and documentation inside. When he finished, he looked up at his son. "Is this true?" Joon's silence was answer enough. "I see." Joon's father closed the folder carefully. "Then the marriage is invalid. The inheritance transfers to Naomi as specified in the will." "No," Joon said quietly. "No?" His father's eyebrows rose. "You committed fraud, Joon. There are legal consequences. The marriage isn't fraudulent." Joon's hand tightened around Elara's. "It became real." Naomi laughed. "How convenient." "It's the truth." "The truth?" Naomi's eyes glittered. "The truth is that you were so desperate to keep control of the empire that you manipulated your childhood friend into a fake marriage. And now that you've been caught, you're trying to rewrite history." "That's not what happened." "Oops." "Then what did happen?" Naomi stepped closer. "Did you magically fall in love with Elara the second the inheritance transferred? Did she suddenly become appealing once you realized she was your only option?" "Be very careful what you say next," Joon said, and his voice had dropped into a register that made everyone in the room go still. But Naomi didn't back down. "Or what? You'll threaten me? Intimidate me? Use your criminal connections to make me disappear?" She turned to face the rest of the room. "This is who you want running the family empire. A man who lies, manipulates, and threatens anyone who challenges him." "I never manipulated Elara." "Didn't you?" Naomi's smile was razor sharp. "Tell me, Elara, when Joon asked you to marry him, did he mention he was in love with you, or did he frame it as a favor between friends?" Elara's throat went dry. Every eye in the room turned toward her. "Answer the question," Naomi said softly. "Did Joon tell you he loved you before you agreed to marry him?" "No," Elara whispered. "But, so he lied to you too?" Naomi turned back to Joon's father. "He used her, just like he uses everyone. And now he expects us to believe this marriage is genuine?" "It is genuine," Joon said through clenched teeth. "Prove it. How am I supposed to—" "Tell us something about your wife that only a real husband would know." Naomi crossed her arms. "Something intimate, something that proves you've actually been paying attention to her for reasons beyond securing your inheritance." The room went silent. Joon's jaw worked. "This is ridiculous." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you can't name a single meaningful detail about the woman you claim to love." Naomi's voice turned mocking. "What's her favorite book? What does she do when she can't sleep? What's the scar on her left shoulder from? Where does she want to travel more than anywhere else in the world?" "Stop," Elara said quietly. But Naomi wasn't finished. "You can't answer, can you? Because this marriage isn't real. It never was. You saw an opportunity to use someone who cared about you, and you took it without hesitation. That's not true." "Then prove it." Naomi slammed her hand on the table. "Tell us one real thing about your wife, Joon. Just one." Joon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Elara felt her heart shatter into pieces as she watched him struggle. Because the truth was, Joon knew everything about her. He knew she read mystery novels when she couldn't sleep. He knew the scar on her shoulder was from falling off a bike when she was 8. He knew she'd dreamed about visiting Santorini since she was a teenager, but standing in front of his family, under pressure, with everyone watching and Naomi attacking, he was frozen. "Joon," Elara whispered. He looked at her and she saw panic in his eyes. "She reads mystery novels," Joon said finally, his voice hoarse. "When she can't sleep. Always mysteries. Never romance or thrillers, just mysteries." Naomi rolled her eyes. "That's generic." The scar on her left shoulder is from falling off a bike when she was 8 years old. She was racing her brother down a hill and hit a patch of gravel. Joon's voice was getting stronger now. She wants to visit Santorini more than anywhere else in the world because she saw a photo of the white buildings and blue domes in a magazine when she was 15 and decided it was the most beautiful place that existed. The room had gone completely silent. Her favorite book is And Then There Were None because she loves the way Agatha Christie structures impossible mysteries. Joon was looking directly at Elara now. She drinks her coffee with extra foam and light sugar at exactly 175 degrees. She hates cilantro but pretends to like it when her mother cooks because she doesn't want to hurt her feelings. She falls asleep on her right side with one hand under the pillow. She hums when she's concentrating. She bites her bottom lip when she's nervous. She's terrified of thunderstorms but won't admit it because she thinks it makes her seem childish. Elara's eyes were burning with tears. "She's been my best friend for 13 years, Joon continued quietly, "and I've been in love with her for almost as long. So yes, the marriage started as a contract, but it became real the second I realized I couldn't survive 5 years pretending I didn't want her." Naomi's expression had shifted from triumph to uncertainty. Joon's father was watching his son with an unreadable expression. "I made a mistake," Joon said, addressing the entire room now. "I should have told Elara how I felt before asking her to marry me. I should have been honest about what I wanted instead of hiding behind legal contracts and conditions. But I was terrified, because losing her would have destroyed me." He turned back to Elara and took both her hands. "I love you," he said clearly. "I love you more than I love this empire. More than I love my family legacy. More than I love anything in this world. And if proving that means walking away from all of this, then I'll do it." "Joon," his father started. "I'm not finished." Joon didn't look away from Elara. "If you want out, I'll understand. I'll sign whatever papers Naomi wants. I'll give up the inheritance. I'll let her have everything. Just please don't leave me." Elara was crying openly now. "I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you," she repeated fiercely. "I don't care about the inheritance. I don't care about any of this. I just want you." Joon pulled her against him and buried his face in her hair. The conference room had dissolved into chaos. Joon's father was conferring with the attorney. The board members were arguing in rapid Korean. Naomi was standing frozen near the windows, her perfect plan crumbling around her. Then the attorney cleared his throat. "There is one way to resolve this." Everyone went quiet. The attorney looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Seo Kang's will specified that the marriage must last 5 years. It did not specify the marriage had to be genuine from the beginning. Emotional intent is not legally binding. If Mr. Seo Kang and Mrs. Seo Kang are currently in a genuine marriage, regardless of how it began, the contract stands. "That's absurd," Naomi snapped. "That's the law," this attorney said calmly. "Unless you can prove the marriage is still fraudulent now, there's no grounds to invalidate the inheritance." Naomi's face went pale. "This is ridiculous." "Actually," another voice said from the doorway, "I can provide proof that the marriage is genuine." Everyone turned. Dr. Park Min-ji stood in the entrance, holding a leather portfolio. "Who the hell are you?" Naomi demanded. "I'm Joon's therapist." Dr. Park walked calmly into the room. "And I have 6 weeks of documented sessions discussing his feelings for his wife, including detailed accounts of his emotional transformation, his fear of losing her, and his realization that he'd been in love with her for over a decade." She placed the portfolio on the table. "Therapy notes are confidential," Joon's father said. "Mr. Seo Kang signed a waiver authorizing me to present this information if his marriage was ever legally challenged." Dr. Park looked at Joon. "You remember, the first session, I asked if you were willing to have your therapy used as evidence if necessary." Joon nodded slowly. "I remember. These documents prove beyond reasonable doubt that Joon's feelings for Elara are genuine." Dr. Park opened the portfolio. Additionally, I'm prepared to testify under oath that I've observed their relationship firsthand and can confirm it is real. The attorney took the portfolio and began reading. His eyebrows rose. Naomi looked like she might be sick. After several long minutes, the attorney looked up. Based on this evidence, I believe the marriage is genuine. The inheritance stands. No, Naomi said. No, it's over, Naomi, Joon's father said quietly. You lost. Naomi's face twisted with rage. She turned on Elara. You think you've won? You think marrying into this family makes you one of us? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Just some girl who got lucky. Enough. Joon's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stepped forward, placing himself between Naomi and Elara. You ever speak to my wife like that again, I'll make sure you regret it. Something in his tone made Naomi take a step back. The meeting is over, Joon's father announced. Everyone leave except Joon and Elara. The room cleared quickly. Even Naomi had enough sense to walk away, though she shot Elara one final venomous look on her way out. When they were finally alone with Joon's father, the old man stood up slowly. That was quite a performance, he said. It wasn't a performance, Joon said flatly. No, I suppose it wasn't. Joon's father studied them both. Your grandmother would have enjoyed this. She always said you needed someone who could handle the family without being destroyed by it. She was right. Yes, she usually was. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found each other, even if the circumstances were unconventional. Then he was gone. Elara and Joon stood alone in the massive conference room, still holding on to each other. That was, Elara started. A nightmare, Joon finished. I was going to say intense. That too. He pulled back to look at her. Are you okay? I think so. Are you? Joon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I meant what I said in there, about walking away from all of this if you wanted me to. I know. And I meant what I said about loving you more than anything else in this world. Elara reached up and cupped his face. I know that too. Joon kissed her gently. Let's go home. They walked out of the estate together, past the security, past the black SUVs, past the remnants of Naomi's failed coup. When they reached their car, Joon's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his expression went cold. What is it? Elara asked. Joon showed her the screen. It was a text from an unknown number containing a single photograph. Elara stared at the image, her blood turning to ice. It was her, in a hospital bed, pregnant. The photo had been taken through a window from outside the building, but there was no mistaking what it showed. Below the image was a message. Congratulations on the baby. Would be a shame if something happened to ruin this happy news. The family should know the truth about when you really conceived. Timeline matters, doesn't it? Elara's hand started shaking. Joon, get in the car, he said quietly. His voice had gone flat and lethal. Now. She didn't argue. As they pulled away from the estate, Elara pressed one hand against her stomach and felt her entire world tilt on its axis. Because she was pregnant. She'd found out 3 days ago. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Joon, and now someone knew. Someone was watching. Someone who wanted to destroy them both. The penthouse felt like a cage when they got back. Joon went straight to the windows and closed every blind, shutting out Seoul's glittering skyline. Then he pulled his phone out and made 3 calls in rapid Korean, his voice sharp and commanding. Security protocols, surveillance sweeps, background checks on everyone who'd been near them in the past month. Elara sat on the couch, watching him transform into someone she barely recognized. This wasn't the man who made her coffee every morning or held her while she slept. This was the heir to a criminal empire, cold and calculating and absolutely lethal. His movements were precise. His voice was devoid of emotion. Every gesture radiated controlled violence. When he finished the calls, he turned to look at her. How long have you known? His voice was flat. Elara's throat felt tight. 3 days. 3 days. Joon repeated the words like they tasted bitter. You were going to tell me? Of course I was going to tell you. I was just waiting for the right moment. The right moment? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Elara, someone has been watching us closely enough to know you're pregnant before I did. Someone who wants to use this against us. And you waited for the right moment? I didn't know someone was watching. You should have told me the second you found out. Joon ran both hands through his hair. I could have protected you. I could have increased security. I could have… What? Locked me in this penthouse like a prisoner? Elara stood up, her own anger rising. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be wrapped in bubble wrap, Joon. You're pregnant with my child. That makes you a target. I've been a target since I married you. The words hung between them, sharp and accusing. Joon's jaw clenched. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you just spent the last 10 minutes treating me like a security problem instead of your wife. That's not what I'm… Joon stopped and pressed his hands against his face. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. I'm terrified, Elara. Someone is threatening you, threatening our baby, and I don't know who it is or how to stop them. Elara crossed the room and took his hands. Then we figure it out together. I need to keep you safe. You can't keep me safe by shutting me out. Joon pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through sheer force of will. I can't lose you, either of you. You won't. You don't know that. Neither do you. Elara pulled back to look at him. But we can't live our lives paralyzed by fear. That's exactly what they want. Joon's phone buzzed again. He looked at it, and his expression went stone cold. It's another message. Elara's stomach dropped. What does it say? He turned the screen toward her. The baby was conceived before the inheritance transferred. That means the pregnancy proves the marriage was genuine from the start. Naomi's case falls apart completely. Unless, of course, someone were to suggest the pregnancy test was faked, or that the timeline doesn't match. Medical records can be very revealing. You have 48 hours to transfer $50 million to the account listed below, or the Seokang family attorney receives a very detailed analysis of your wife's medical history. Below the message was a cryptocurrency wallet address. This is extortion, Elara whispered. This is war. Joon's voice had gone deadly quiet. Someone in my family is trying to destroy us. You think it's Naomi? I don't know. This doesn't feel like her style. He was already pulling up contact information on his phone. Naomi's aggressive and direct. This is calculated. Patient. Someone who's been watching us for months. Who else would want to hurt us? Half the family? Joon started dialing. My uncles are furious I got the inheritance instead of them. The board members who were loyal to Naomi feel betrayed. There are at least a dozen people who'd benefit from seeing me fail. So what do we do? Joon looked at her, and Elara saw something dark and dangerous in his eyes. We set a trap. The plan came together over the next 6 hours. Joon called in every favor he had, activated every resource in his network. Within an hour, the penthouse was filled with 3 of his most trusted security specialists, his personal attorney, and a cybersecurity expert who looked like she hadn't slept in days. They worked through the night mapping connections, tracing digital footprints, building a profile of whoever was threatening them. Elara sat at the dining room table watching Joon orchestrate everything with terrifying efficiency. He was in his element now, sharp, focused, absolutely merciless. This was the man who'd been groomed since childhood to run a criminal empire, the man who could make people disappear with a single phone call. And right now, that man was using every tool at his disposal to protect her. Around 3 in the morning, the cybersecurity expert looked up from her laptop. I found something. Everyone gathered around her screen. The messages were sent using a burner phone, she explained, but they routed through a VPN server registered to a company owned by Seokang Enterprises, specifically a subsidiary that handles private security contracts. Joon's expression went cold. Which subsidiary? Sentinel Solutions, based in Gangnam, Joon finished. My uncle runs that division. The room went silent. Your uncle Joon Seo? The attorney asked carefully. Joon nodded. He's been trying to position himself for a board seat for years. If I lose the inheritance, he'd be first in line for executive control under Naomi. So they're working together, Elara said. Maybe. Or Joon Seo is playing his own game. Joon turned to the security specialist. I need surveillance on him. Every call, every meeting, everyone he talks to, and I need it yesterday. Already on it, one of them confirmed. What about the money? Elara asked. Are we actually going to pay them? No. June's voice was ice cold. "We're going to make them think we're paying them. And when they show up to collect, we're going to be waiting." Acto. The trap was set for Thursday night at midnight. June's team had spent 2 days tracking Jun Seo's movements, documenting his communications, building an airtight case. They discovered he'd been working with Naomi all along, feeding her information, helping her gather evidence against June's marriage, coordinating the blackmail scheme to extract money before forcing a final confrontation. Now they were going to end it. The meeting location was a private warehouse in Seoul's industrial district, the kind of place where the Seokong family handled business they didn't want documented. Jun had sent word through carefully controlled channels that he'd pay the extortion demand in cash, but only if Jun Seo came to collect it personally. The message was designed to force Jun Seo's hand. Either he'd show up and admit his involvement, or he'd send someone else and confirm he was the one pulling the strings. Either way, Jun would have his answer. Elara insisted on coming. "Absolutely not," Jun said when she told him. "You're staying here with security. I'm not staying here while you walk into a potential ambush." "Elara, this is my fight too, Jun. That's my baby they're threatening, my life they're trying to destroy." She grabbed his arm. "I'm coming with you." "It's too dangerous." "Then make it less dangerous. But I'm not sitting in this penthouse waiting to find out if you survived." Elara's voice was shaking but determined. "We do this together, or not at all?" Jun looked at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled roughly and pulled her against him. "You stay in the car, surrounded by security. You don't move unless I tell you to. Okay? And if anything goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong." "If anything goes wrong," Jun repeated firmly, "you get out. You don't wait for me. You don't try to help. You just get as far away as possible." Elara wanted to argue, but the look in Jun's eyes stopped her. This wasn't negotiable. "Okay," she said quietly. Jun kissed her forehead. "I love you. I love you too." The warehouse was exactly as ominous as Elara expected. They arrived at 11:45 p.m. in a convoy of 3 armored vehicles. Security formed a tight perimeter immediately. 2 snipers took positions on nearby rooftops. Jun had planned this like a military operation, and watching it unfold made Elara's stomach churn with anxiety. She stayed in the middle vehicle like Jun had ordered, surrounded by 2 bodyguards who looked like they could stop bullets with their bare hands. Through the tinted windows, she watched Jun exit his car and walk toward the warehouse entrance. He moved with absolute confidence, shoulders back, expression cold and controlled. But Elara knew him well enough now to see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands stayed loose at his sides, ready to react. He disappeared inside the warehouse. Elara counted her heartbeats. 1 minute passed. 2. 5. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jun. "Everything's fine." Jun Seo showed, recording everything. Elara exhaled slowly. Then the shooting started. The sound of gunfire erupted from inside the warehouse, sharp, rapid cracks that made Elara's entire body go cold. The bodyguards immediately moved to shield her, their hands going to their weapons. "Stay down," one of them barked. But Elara was already moving, reaching for the door handle. "Ma'am, don't." She ignored him and threw the door open. More gunfire. Shouting in Korean. The sound of something heavy crashing to the ground. Elara ran toward the warehouse entrance before anyone could stop her, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. Security was yelling at her to stop, to get back. But she couldn't. Not when Jun was in there. Not when everything was falling apart. She burst through the warehouse doors and froze. The interior was a nightmare of shadows and concrete. Shipping containers were stacked along the walls. Overhead lights cast harsh, industrial shadows. And in the center of the space, Jun was on his knees with a gun pressed against the back of his head. Jun Seo stood behind him, his face twisted with rage. Naomi was there too, standing off to the side with 3 armed men. Her pristine white dress was gone, replaced by black tactical gear that made her look like she'd been planning for war. "Elara," Jun said quietly, his eyes locked on hers. "I told you to stay in the car." "Well, I didn't." Her voice was shaking. "Let him go." Jun Seo laughed. "Or what? You'll call security? They're a little busy right now." He nodded toward the entrance, where Elara could hear sounds of fighting. "Your people are good, but mine are better." This is over, Junseo, Joon said, his voice deadly calm despite the gun against his skull. You've already lost. Have I? Because from where I'm standing, I have the heir to the Seokong Empire on his knees, and his pregnant wife as leverage. Junseo's smile was cruel. I'd say I'm winning. The recording is already uploaded to the cloud, Joon said. Every word you've said tonight is documented. Even if you kill me, the evidence goes straight to the family attorney and the police. Junseo's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Try me. The tension in the room ratcheted up to unbearable levels. Elara could see Naomi shifting nervously, her confidence cracking. Junseo's hand was shaking slightly where he held the gun. You were never supposed to have the empire, Junseo said quietly. You're too weak, too sentimental. Your grandmother made a mistake choosing you. She didn't make a mistake, Joon said. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew I'd do whatever it took to protect the people I love, even if it meant destroying people like you. Touching, Junseo's finger moved toward the trigger. But it doesn't change. Let him go. Everyone turned. Joon's father stood in the warehouse entrance, flanked by a dozen armed men in Seokong security uniforms. His face was carved from stone, his eyes cold and merciless. Father, Junseo said carefully, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're threatening to kill my son while extorting his pregnant wife. Joon's father walked forward slowly. Please explain how I'm misunderstanding the situation. Junseo's gun hand was definitely shaking now. He doesn't deserve the inheritance. You know that. He's weak. He married some nobody. That nobody is part of this family now, which means she's under my protection. Joon's father stopped 10 feet away. Put the gun down, Junseo. I can't do that. Then you're choosing to die here tonight. The warehouse went absolutely silent. Junseo looked around wildly, at Naomi, who had gone pale and was slowly backing toward the exit, at his own men who were now facing down superior firepower, at Joon, who was still on his knees but looked more dangerous than anyone else in the room. This isn't over, Junseo said finally. Yes, Joon's father said quietly. It is. He made a small gesture with his hand. Two of his men moved forward and disarmed Junseo in seconds. The older man didn't resist. He just stood there, defeated, as security restrained him. Joon stood up slowly and immediately crossed to Elara, pulling her against him hard. Are you okay? I'm fine. Her voice was muffled against his chest. Are you? I will be. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. You were supposed to stay in the car. I know. You could have been killed. So could you. Joon looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just kissed her desperately, like he was trying to prove they were both still alive. When they finally broke apart, Joon's father was standing nearby watching them with an unreadable expression. Thank you, Joon said quietly. Don't thank me yet. His father gestured to Junseo, who was being led away in restraints. This is going to create problems. The family will fracture. There will be investigations. Things are going to get worse before they get better. I can handle it. I know you can. Joon's father's expression softened slightly. Your grandmother chose well. Then he turned and walked away, issuing orders in rapid Korean to his security team. Elara and Joon stood alone in the middle of the warehouse, surrounded by the wreckage of the confrontation. Is it really over? Elara asked. Joon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The immediate threat is over, but there will be others. There always are. Can we handle them? Yes. Joon pulled her close again. Because we're doing it together now. Elara pressed her face against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong despite everything. They'd survived. But as security began clearing the warehouse and sirens wailed in the distance, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still coming. Okay. The aftermath unfolded over the next 72 hours in a blur of police interviews, family meetings, and legal maneuvering. Junseo was arrested and charged with extortion, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Naomi disappeared, fled to Hong Kong, according to intelligence reports, though no one could confirm for certain. The Seokong family board held an emergency session and officially confirmed Joon's control of the empire, And through it all, Elara watched Joon transform. He wasn't the cold, distant man she'd first married anymore, but he wasn't just the gentle person who made her coffee every morning either. He'd become something else, someone who could be both ruthless and tender, calculating and vulnerable, a leader who commanded absolute loyalty while still letting himself love completely. On the fourth day after the warehouse confrontation, they had their first official appointment with an obstetrician. Joon held her hand through the entire examination, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in that familiar rhythm. When the doctor confirmed the pregnancy was healthy and showed them the first ultrasound image, Elara watched tears slide down Joon's face. "That's our baby," he whispered. "Yeah." Elara was crying too. "That's our baby." The doctor smiled and stepped out to give them privacy. Joon pulled Elara into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a great father." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Elara pulled back to look at him. "Because you're a great husband, and you fight for the people you love, and that's all our baby needs." Joon kissed her softly. "I love you so much." "I love you too." They sat together in the examination room, looking at the grainy ultrasound image, trying to absorb the magnitude of what was coming. Then Joon's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression went carefully neutral. "It's the family attorney." "Answer it." Joon put the call on speaker. "Mr. Seo Kang," the attorney's voice came through crisp and professional. "I'm calling with an update on the legal proceedings against your uncle." "What kind of update?" "Joon Seo has offered to provide testimony against other family members involved in various criminal enterprises in exchange for a reduced sentence." The attorney paused. "He's named several people, including some on your current board of directors." Joon's jaw tightened. "How many people?" "7. Possibly more depending on what else he reveals." "And the board?" "Will need to be restructured immediately. We're looking at significant upheaval across multiple divisions of the company." Joon closed his eyes briefly. "When?" "The formal announcement goes out tomorrow morning. I wanted to give you advance warning so you could prepare." "Thank you." "There's one more thing." The attorney's voice became even more careful. "Joon Seo also mentioned that your grandmother knew about his activities, that she'd been aware of corruption within the family for years, but chose not to act on it." Elara felt Joon go rigid beside her. "What are you saying?" Joon asked quietly. "I'm saying your grandmother may have structured her will the way she did specifically to force a confrontation, to create a situation where the corruption would have to come to light." The attorney exhaled slowly. "She was cleaning house, Mr. Seo Kang, and she chose you to finish what she started." The call ended. Elara and Joon sat in silence, the ultrasound image still clutched in his hand. "Your grandmother," Elara said finally, "she really did plan all of this." "Apparently." Joon's voice was hollow. "The marriage clause wasn't about love or family legacy. It was about finding someone I'd trust enough to fight beside me when everything fell apart. And she knew I was that person." "Yes." Elara thought about the tea ceremony years ago, when Joon's grandmother had looked at her with those knowing eyes and said, "Someday, that will matter more than you realize." She'd been planning this from the beginning. "What are you going to do?" Elara asked. Joon looked at the ultrasound image, then at her, then back at the image. "I'm going to rebuild the empire the right way. Clean out the corruption. Make it into something I can pass down to our child without shame. That's going to take years." "I know. And it's going to make you enemies." "I know that too." Joon took her hand. "But I'm not doing it alone anymore. That changes everything." Elara squeezed his hand back. "Then let's burn it all down and build something better." Joon smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Together." Together. They left the clinic hand in hand, stepping out into Seoul's afternoon sunlight. Security formed around them immediately, but for once, Elara didn't feel trapped by it. She felt protected, because she wasn't just married to one of Korea's most powerful men anymore. She was his partner, his equal, the person he'd chosen to stand beside while he dismantled a corrupt empire and built something new from the ashes. And their baby, the child conceived in the middle of a fake marriage that had become desperately real, would inherit something worth having. But first, they had to survive what came next. Mort. The formal board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Joon spent the entire weekend preparing his strategy, reviewing documents, building alliances with the board members who weren't implicated in Joon Seo's testimony. Elara watched him work with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what was at stake. On Sunday night, she found him standing in his office at 2 a.m, staring at a wall covered in organizational charts and legal documents. "Come to bed," she said from the doorway. "I can't. Not yet." Joon didn't turn around. "I need to make sure I have every angle covered. One mistake, and this whole thing collapses." "Joon." Elara walked over and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You've done everything you can. The rest is up to fate." "I don't trust fate." "Then trust me." She pressed her cheek against his back. "Trust that we'll handle whatever happens tomorrow. Together." Joon turned in her arms and pulled her close. "What if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together and figure out what comes next." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple." Elara looked up at him. "We love each other. We're building a family. Everything else is just details." Joon laughed quietly. "Just details. Like dismantling a criminal empire and exposing decades of corruption." "Exactly, just details." He kissed her softly, then rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not running. For staying. For believing I could be more than what my family made me." "You've always been more," Elara said. "You just needed someone to remind you." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the darkness, gathering strength for what was coming. Then Joon's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He looked at it and his entire body went rigid. "What?" Elara asked, her stomach dropping. Joon turned the screen toward her. It was a photo of the Seokang family estate, on fire. Flames were pouring out of the windows on the east wing. Black smoke billowed into the Seoul night sky. And in the foreground, standing perfectly still while the building burned behind her, was Naomi. Below the image was a single line of text. "You want war? Let's have war." Elara stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. "She's back," Joon said quietly. His voice had gone flat and deadly. "And she's done playing games." He was already moving, grabbing his jacket, calling security, issuing orders in rapid Korean. Elara followed him toward the elevator, her hand pressed protectively over her stomach. The warehouse confrontation hadn't been the end. It had only been the beginning. And now, with everything they'd built hanging in the balance and their baby's future at stake, Naomi had just declared total war on the Seokang family. The Seokang family estate was still burning when they arrived. Fire crews had surrounded the property, their hoses spraying arcs of water against flames that seemed to mock their efforts. The east wing was completely engulfed, windows exploding from the heat, smoke pouring into the Seoul night sky like a funeral shroud. Police barriers kept civilians back while officers in riot gear secured the perimeter. Joon's convoy pushed through with authority that came from decades of influence. Security cleared a path. The family name still carried weight, even as one of their ancestral homes burned to the ground. Elara stepped out of the car and felt the heat hit her face from 50 feet away. Ash floated through the air like snow. The acrid smell of burning wood and expensive furniture made her eyes water. Joon stood beside her, his expression carved from stone, watching his family's legacy burn. "Where is she?" he asked the security chief who'd been first on scene. "Gone. Cameras caught her leaving in a black sedan 20 minutes ago. We're tracking it now." "She wanted us to see this." Joon's voice was flat. "She wanted us to know what she's capable of." "The fire started in your grandmother's private study," the security chief continued. "Accelerant was used. Professional job. She had help." Elara felt sick. "Was anyone inside?" "No. The staff evacuated safely." She timed it perfectly. Maximum destruction, 0 casualties. The chief handed Joon a tablet showing security footage. "She knew we'd come. Look." Joon pressed play. The footage showed Naomi walking calmly through the estate's front gates 2 hours earlier. She was alone, dressed in black, carrying what looked like a small duffel bag. She moved with absolute confidence, nodding at the security camera like she was greeting an old friend. Then she disappeared inside. 30 minutes later, smoke began pouring from the east wing windows. Naomi emerged 7 minutes after that, empty-handed, her clothes spotless, her expression serene. She stood in front of the burning building and looked directly into the camera. Then she smiled and blew a kiss before walking away. The footage ended. "She's insane," Elara whispered. "No." Joon handed this tablet back. "She's making a statement. This isn't about the estate. It's about showing me that nothing I care about is safe." "So what do we do?" Joon was quiet for a long moment, watching firefighters battle flames that were already winning. Then he said, "We end this. Tonight." Doubts. They tracked Naomi to a private airfield on Seoul's outskirts. According to intelligence, she had a chartered jet scheduled to depart for Singapore at 4 a.m. From there, she could disappear into any number of countries without extradition treaties. Once she was gone, she'd become a ghost, untouchable, dangerous, able to strike at the Seokong family from anywhere in the world. Joon wasn't going to let that happen. The convoy arrived at the airfield at 3:17 a.m. It was a small facility used primarily by Korea's elite for private travel. Minimal security, lots of blind spots, exactly the kind of place someone planning to flee would choose. Naomi's black sedan was parked near the main hangar. Joon's vehicles surrounded it within seconds, cutting off any escape route. Security poured out, establishing a perimeter. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a capture. But when they checked the sedan, it was empty. "She's already inside," the security chief reported. Joon turned to Elara. "Stay here." "No." "Elara, she's—" "I said no." She grabbed his arm. "We finish this together or not at all." Joon looked like he wanted to argue, but the expression on Elara's face stopped him. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when they were this close. "Stay behind me," he said finally. "And if anything goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong." They walked toward the hangar together, flanked by armed security. The building's interior was dim, lit only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. A single private jet sat in the center of the space, its stairs deployed, engines already warming up. And standing at the base of those stairs was Naomi. She looked exactly like she had in the security footage. Black clothes, serene expression, completely at ease. Like burning down a family estate and threatening a pregnant woman was just another Tuesday evening. "Joon," she said warmly, "I was wondering if you'd make it in time." "Get away from the plane, Naomi." "Why? So you can arrest me? Hand me over to the police?" She laughed. "We both know that's not how this family operates." "This ends tonight," Joon said coldly. "You can surrender peacefully, or we can do this the hard way." "The hard way?" Naomi tilted her head. "I wonder what that looks like for you. Violence has never really been your style, has it? You prefer to operate through lawyers and contracts. Very civilized, very weak." "Weak?" Joon's voice dropped to something lethal. "You burned down my grandmother's home. You threatened my wife and unborn child. You tried to destroy everything she built. And you call me weak?" "Because you haven't pulled that gun your security chief is carrying," Naomi said simply. "Because even now, after everything I've done, you're still trying to resolve this without bloodshed. That's weakness, Joon. That's why you were never fit to lead this family." Elara stepped forward before Joon could respond. "He's not weak. He's better than you. Better than this entire corrupt system, and that's what terrifies you." Naomi's eyes shifted to Elara, and for the first time, her composure cracked slightly. "You. The little translator who thought she could marry into power and survive. Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" "A criminal empire you never deserved?" Elara shot back. "Money you didn't earn? Power you plan to abuse?" "I earned every bit of it," Naomi said, her voice rising. "I spent my entire life preparing to lead this family. I learned the business from the ground up. I made connections, built alliances, did everything that was asked of me. And then grandmother decided to give it all to Joon because he was her favorite. Because he was born with the right last name, because he's a man." The bitterness in her voice was raw and genuine. "So this is about revenge?" Joon asked quietly. "This is about justice." Naomi's hands were shaking now. "I deserved that inheritance. I deserved the chance to prove myself. But instead, grandmother gave it to you and made you jump through hoops just to keep it. A marriage clause. How degrading. How perfectly designed to humiliate you." "She wasn't trying to humiliate me," Joon said. "She was trying to save me." "From what?" "From becoming like you. June stepped closer. Grandmother knew the empire was rotting from the inside. She knew people like Junseo were using the family name to cover up criminal activity. She knew if she handed control to someone who only cared about power, the entire thing would collapse into something monstrous. So she chose me. Not because I was her favorite, but because she thought I might actually give a damn about doing things the right way. Naomi laughed, but it sounded broken. The right way. There is no right way in this world, June. There's only winning and losing, and tonight, you lose. She pulled something from her pocket. A detonator. The estate wasn't the only thing I rigged to burn, Naomi said calmly. This entire hangar is wired with enough explosives to level everything within 100 yards, including your wife and that baby she's carrying. The security team immediately raised their weapons. Don't, Naomi said, holding up the detonator. Dead man's switch. I let go, we all die. You shoot me, we all die. The only way anyone walks out of here is if I get on that plane and disappear. Elara felt her blood turn to ice. Joon had gone completely still beside her. You're bluffing, he said. Am I? You want to test that theory with your pregnant wife standing 10 feet away? The hangar was absolutely silent except for the low whine of the jet engines. Joon's mind was racing. Elara could see it in his eyes. He was calculating odds, assessing options, trying to find a way out of this that didn't end with everyone dead. Let her go, Naomi said quietly. Send Elara back to the cars, let her leave. Then you and I can finish this conversation like adults. No, Elara said immediately. Elara, Joon started. I'm not leaving you. She's pregnant, Joon, Naomi said, and for just a moment something that might have been genuine concern flickered across her face. Whatever you think of me, I'm not a monster. Let her leave. Protect your child. Joon looked at Elara. Go. No. Please. His voice cracked. Please, Elara. I can't lose you both. I can't. Elara felt tears burning behind her eyes. If I leave, she'll kill you. Maybe, but at least you'll survive. I don't want to survive without you. You have to. Joon took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. For our baby, for the life we're supposed to build together. You have to leave. Joon, I love you, he said desperately, more than anything in this world, which is why you need to walk away right now. Elara wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to refuse. But then she thought about the tiny life growing inside her, the baby that would never know their father if she stayed, the future they'd planned that would die here in this hangar if she didn't walk away. I love you too, she whispered. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, every step feeling like betrayal. She made it halfway across the hangar before Naomi's voice stopped her. Actually, I lied. Elara turned. Naomi was smiling. There is no dead man's switch. The hangar isn't wired. I just needed to see if Joon would actually choose you over everything else. What? Joon's voice was barely audible. Your grandmother's will, Naomi continued, had a final clause that wasn't read at the initial meeting. A clause that stated if you ever put your personal relationships above the family's interests, the inheritance would be immediately revoked. She held up a document. I have it right here. Signed and notarized. That's impossible, Joon said. Is it? Your grandmother spent her entire life prioritizing family over everything else, over love, over happiness, over personal fulfillment. She believed that was the only way to maintain power, and she wanted to ensure you do the same. Naomi's smile widened. But you just failed the test. You chose Elara. You were willing to sacrifice yourself to save her, which means you violated the terms of the inheritance. She pulled out her phone and held it up. I've been recording this entire conversation. The board will have the footage by morning, and by noon tomorrow, I'll be officially in control of everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Joon started laughing. It was a quiet sound at first, almost sad. But it grew louder, more genuine, until he was laughing so hard he had to brace his hands on his knees. Naomi's smile faded. What's so funny? You, Joon said, straightening up. This whole performance, the detonator, the secret clause, the recording. He shook his head. You really thought you had me. I do have you. No, you don't. Joon pulled out his own phone and showed her the screen. See, The thing about being in therapy is you learn to anticipate psychological manipulation. Dr. Park warned me someone might try exactly this kind of play. So I had my attorney review every single document related to grandmother's will, every clause, every condition, every footnote. He swiped to a scanned document and held it up so Naomi could see. There is no final clause about personal relationships, Joon said calmly. That document you're holding is a forgery. A good one, I'll admit, but still fake. Naomi's face went white. And your recording? Joon continued. It just captured you admitting to arson, extortion, and attempted murder, so thank you for that. Naomi looked down at the detonator in her hand, then at the phone, then at Joon. You're lying. I'm not. But even if I was, it doesn't matter anymore. Joon's expression hardened. Because you made a fundamental mistake tonight, Naomi. You assumed I cared more about the inheritance than I care about my wife, and you were wrong. I'd give up every dollar, every business, every ounce of power to keep her safe. That's not weakness. That's the only thing that makes me strong enough to do what comes next. He gestured to security. Arrest her. The security team moved fast. Naomi tried to run for the jet, but they cut her off within seconds. The detonator clattered to the concrete floor, useless and harmless. Naomi fought as they restrained her, screaming obscenities in Korean, her perfect composure completely shattered. Within 2 minutes, she was in custody. The police arrived 5 minutes later to formally take her into custody. Charges were read, rights were explained. Naomi was loaded into the back of a police van, still screaming, still fighting, still refusing to accept that she'd lost. Elara watched it all from Joon's arms, her face pressed against his chest, his hands holding her like he might never let go. Is it really over? She whispered. Yes. Joon's voice was rough with exhaustion and relief. It's really over. The inheritance is still intact. The board confirmed it an hour ago. He pulled back to look at her. Joon Seo's testimony cleared out most of the corruption. Naomi's arrest tonight eliminated the last real threat. It's done. Elara felt tears sliding down her face. We survived. We did more than survive. Joon kissed her forehead gently. We won. The reconstruction of the estate took 6 months. Joon refused to simply rebuild what had been destroyed. Instead, he hired architects to redesign the entire East Wing as something new, a private family residence separated from the business operations that occupied the rest of the property, a place where he and Elara and their baby could exist without the weight of criminal history pressing down on them. The old study where his grandmother's will had been read was demolished completely. In its place, they built a nursery. Elara stood in that nursery on a warm afternoon in October, 7 months pregnant, her hands resting on the curve of her belly while she watched workers install the final pieces of furniture. Joon had chosen everything himself: a crib made from sustainable wood, soft rugs in neutral colors, blackout curtains that would help their baby sleep through Seoul's constant city lights. What do you think? Joon asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. I think it's perfect. You said that about the last 3 designs. Because they were all perfect. Elara leaned back against him. You're overthinking this. I'm preparing. You're nesting. Joon laughed quietly. Maybe. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching afternoon sunlight stream through the windows. Outside, the estate's gardens had been replanted. The burned sections had been cleared away. Everything was starting over, growing back stronger. Have you heard from your father? Elara asked. He called this morning, wanted to discuss the quarterly earnings report. Joon's arms tightened slightly around her, and to ask what we're naming the baby. What did you tell him? That we're still deciding. Liar, Elara smiled. We decided weeks ago. I know, but I wanted to tell him in person. Joon pressed a kiss against her temple. He's trying, Elara, to be better, to be present. It's not perfect, but it's something. That's all anyone can do, Elara said quietly. Try to be better than they were yesterday. Joon turned her around to face him, his hands gentle on her swollen belly. Have I told you today that I love you? 3 times. Make it 4. He kissed her softly. I love you. I love you too. And I'm terrified I'm going to be a terrible father. Elara had been waiting for this confession. It had been building for weeks, visible in the way Joon obsessed over every detail of the nursery, every baby book, every parenting class they attended. "You're not going to be a terrible father," she said firmly. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because you're already worrying about it. Terrible fathers don't worry." "That's not how it works." "That's exactly how it works." Elara took his face in her hands. "You're going to make mistakes. We both are. But we're going to love this baby with everything we have, and that's enough." Joon looked at her with an expression that was equal parts love and fear. "What if I turn out like my father, cold and distant and unable to show affection? Then I'll remind you that you're not him, that you made different choices, that you chose love over power." Elara's thumb brushed across his cheek. "And if you forget, our baby will remind you, every single day." Joon exhaled slowly and pulled her close, careful of her belly. "How did I get this lucky?" "You made a phone call at 2:47 in the morning." "Best decision I ever made." They stayed like that until the workers finished installing the crib and quietly excused themselves. Then Joon led Elara to the rocking chair in the corner of the nursery and pulled her into his lap. "Tell me a story," Elara said, settling against him. "What kind of story?" "Any kind. Something hopeful." Joon thought for a moment. Then he said, "Once upon a time, there was a man who thought he was unlovable. He'd been raised in a world of violence and corruption, taught that love was weakness and vulnerability was death. So he built walls around himself and convinced himself he was better off alone." "This sounds like a sad story," Elara murmured. "Wait." Joon's fingers traced patterns on her arm. "Because then he met someone who saw through all his walls. Someone who looked at him and saw possibility instead of darkness. Someone who stayed beside him even when he gave her every reason to leave." "I like her already." She was impossible not to like, stubborn, brave, completely unwilling to let him hide. Joon's voice softened. And slowly, without him realizing it, she taught him that love wasn't weakness, that letting someone in didn't mean losing himself, that being vulnerable was the bravest thing he could do. Did they live happily ever after? "They lived messily ever after," Joon corrected, "with arguments and mistakes and moments where they weren't sure they'd survive. But they survived anyway, because they chose each other, every single day, even when it was hard." Elara tilted her head back to look at him. "That's a good story." "It's our story." "I know." She kissed him gently. "Tell me the ending." "There isn't one yet. We're still writing it." "Then tell me what happens next." Joon's hand moved to rest over her belly, where their baby was moving in slow rolling shifts. "Next, we become parents. We raise a child in a world that's still complicated and dangerous, but a little bit better than the one we inherited. We teach them that power without compassion is meaningless, that love is worth fighting for, that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to stand beside someone even when everything falls apart." "That sounds exhausting." "It probably will be." "Good thing we're doing it together." "Good thing," Joon agreed. They sat in the nursery as afternoon faded into evening, making plans for a future that finally felt possible. Outside, Seoul's lights began to flicker on across the skyline. The city that had witnessed their fake marriage become real, their friendship transform into love, their survival through fire and betrayal. And in that moment, wrapped around each other in a room built from the ashes of family legacy, Elara understood something her younger self never could have comprehended. The most powerful love stories weren't born from perfect timing or ideal circumstances. They were born from two people who looked at each other in the darkness and decided to be each other's light. 4 years and 8 months after the courthouse wedding, Joon and Elara renewed their vows. The ceremony took place on the rooftop of their penthouse on a warm summer evening. No judge this time, no legal obligations, just a small gathering of people they trusted. Dr. Park, who'd helped them find their way to each other. Joon's father, who was trying to be the grandfather he'd never been as a father. A handful of friends who'd stood beside them through everything. And running between the chairs, laughing wildly, was their daughter. Min-seo was 3 years old, with Joon's dark eyes and Elara's stubborn determination. She'd been born on a snowy February morning after 18 hours of labor that had reduced Joon to a terrified, weeping mess. The moment the doctor placed her in his arms, something in Joon had fundamentally transformed. He'd looked at his daughter's tiny face and understood finally what his grandmother had been trying to teach him. Love wasn't weakness, it was everything. Now, watching Minseo attempt to catch fireflies in the rooftop garden while wearing a flower crown that was slowly sliding off her head, Elara felt her chest ache with happiness so intense it almost hurt. "She's going to fall," Joon said quietly beside her. "Probably. Should I stop her?" "No. Let her fall. She'll get back up." And Joon smiled and took Elara's hand. She was 6 months pregnant with their second child, a son they'd already decided to name after Joon's grandmother, a way of honoring the woman who'd seen what they could become before either of them understood it themselves. The officiant cleared her throat. "Shall we begin?" Joon and Elara stood facing each other in the golden evening light. "4 years ago," the officiant began, "you entered into a marriage born from obligation and fear. Tonight, you're choosing each other freely, choosing to recommit to the partnership you've built, choosing love over everything else." Joon's hands were shaking slightly as he held Elara's. "I'm supposed to have vows prepared," he said, "but everything I wrote sounded wrong, too formal, too distant, not true enough." "So tell me something true," Elara said softly. Joon looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "The truth is, I've spent my whole life afraid of becoming like my family. Cold, ruthless, incapable of real love. And then you walked into my life and refused to let me hide. You saw every dark corner of my world and stayed anyway. You married me when I gave you every reason to run. You fought beside me when everything collapsed. You gave me a daughter who makes me want to be better every single day." His voice cracked slightly. "So the truth is this, I'm not afraid anymore. Because I know that no matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, I'll always have you, and that makes me braver than I ever thought possible." Elara was crying openly now. "Your turn," Joon said, his own eyes wet. Elara took a shaky breath. "I fell in love with you when I was 19 years old, and for 13 years I convinced myself it was enough just to exist in your orbit, to be your friend, to take whatever scraps of your life you were willing to share." "Elara Shum," "But it wasn't enough," she continued. "And when you asked me to marry you, I said yes because I was tired of pretending I didn't want more. I wanted all of you, the good parts and the broken parts, and the parts you tried to hide. I wanted to stand beside you while you became the man you were always meant to be." She squeezed his hands. "And I'm so grateful you let me, because watching you transform from someone who thought he was unlovable into someone who loves so fiercely, that's been the greatest privilege of my life." Joon pulled her into a kiss before the officiant could formally pronounce them remarried. The small gathering erupted into applause. Minseo ran over and crashed into their legs, demanding to know why everyone was crying. Joon picked her up and settled her on his hip, and Elara leaned against them both, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. This was her family. Messy and complicated and built from the wreckage of criminal empires and fake marriages and 13 years of unspoken love. But it was hers, and it was real. Late that night, after the guests had gone home, and Minseo had finally crashed from sugar and exhaustion, Joon found Elara on the rooftop again. She was standing at the edge, looking out over Seoul's glittering skyline, one hand pressed against her lower back, where their son was apparently practicing soccer kicks. "You okay?" Joon asked, coming up behind her. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About your grandmother." Elara turned to look at him. "About how she orchestrated all of this before either of us understood what we needed." Joon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I found something last week, in her personal effects that were returned to me after the investigation closed." "What kind of something?" He pulled a letter from his pocket. "She wrote this 6 months before she died. My father found it sealed with instructions to give it to me after the inheritance was settled and the family stabilized." "Have you read it?" "Not yet. I was waiting for tonight." Joon held the envelope up. "Want to read it with me?" Elara nodded. They sat down on one of the rooftop benches, pressed close together, while Joon carefully opened the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in his grandmother's elegant handwriting. Joon read it aloud. My dear Joon, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked. You've survived the chaos I engineered. You've held on to the inheritance despite everything I threw at you. And most importantly, you've learned what I spent my entire life running from. Love is not weakness. I married for duty. I raised your father in isolation. I built an empire through ruthlessness and sacrifice. And I convinced myself it was worth it. That power and legacy mattered more than happiness or connection. But in my final years, watching you struggle to become someone different than me, I realized I'd been wrong. The empire meant nothing if it turned you into the same hollow person I became. So I made a choice. I structured my will to force you into an impossible situation. I knew you'd turn to Elara, the girl who'd loved you quietly for years while you were too blind to see it. I knew that being married to her would either destroy you both or transform you into something better. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm sorry for the manipulation, but I'm not sorry for the outcome. Because if you're reading this, it means you chose love. You chose vulnerability. You chose to become the kind of leader this family has needed for generations. Take care of that girl, Joon. She sees you more clearly than anyone else ever will. And teach your children that power without compassion is meaningless. That family is about more than blood and obligation. Teach them everything I couldn't teach you. With love and pride, grandmother. Joon's hands were shaking when he finished reading. She knew, Elara whispered. The whole time, she knew exactly what she was doing. She was playing matchmaker from beyond the grave, Joon said, his voice rough with emotion. And she was ruthless about it. Would you have done anything differently? Joon thought about that for a long time. Then he said, No. Every terrible, painful moment led us here, and I wouldn't trade here for anything. Elara leaned her head against his shoulder. She would have loved Minseo. She would have spoiled her rotten. Absolutely. They sat in comfortable silence, looking out over the city that had witnessed every moment of their journey. From that first desperate phone call at 2:47 in the morning, to the courthouse wedding, to the warehouse confrontation, to this quiet moment on a rooftop 4 years later. Do you ever miss it? Elara asked. The simplicity of before? Before you were my wife? Before everything got so complicated? Joon pulled her closer. Not even for a second. Complicated means real. Complicated means we're actually living instead of just surviving. That's very profound for midnight. I've been in therapy for 4 years. I have profound moments now. Elara laughed. Fair point. Minseo's voice crackled through the baby monitor clipped to Joon's belt. She was calling for her father, probably woken up by a bad dream or the unfamiliar sounds of the rooftop event being broken down. Duty calls, Joon said, standing up. But before he could walk away, Elara caught his hand. Hey, she said softly. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For calling me that night, for trusting me with all of this, for becoming someone who could love without fear. Elara's voice was thick with emotion. For giving me the life I was afraid to ask for. Joon pulled her to her feet and kissed her forehead. Thank you for answering. Then he headed inside to comfort their daughter, and Elara stood alone on the rooftop for a few minutes longer. She thought about the girl she'd been at 19, awkward, uncertain, hopelessly in love with a boy who didn't see her. She thought about the woman she'd become, a wife, a mother, someone strong enough to stand beside a man while he dismantled a corrupt empire and built something better. And she thought about the baby growing inside her, who would never know the fear and desperation that had defined the beginning of their parents' story. He would only know love, messy, complicated, hard-won love. The kind of love that survived impossible odds and became stronger for it. The kind of love worth fighting for. From inside the penthouse, she heard Joon's voice reading their daughter a bedtime story. The same story he'd told Elara in the nursery 4 years ago. The one about a man who thought he was unlovable and the woman who taught him otherwise. Elara pressed her hand against her belly and felt their son kick in response. You're going to love your father, she whispered. He's going to teach you how to be brave and kind and unafraid of vulnerability. He's going to show you that real strength comes from choosing love even when it's terrifying. Another kick. And your sister is going to teach you how to be fearless, Elara continued, smiling. And your grandfather is going to spoil you, and I'm going to do my best not to mess you up too badly. She paused, then added, And somewhere your great-grandmother is probably watching all of this with a satisfied smile. Because all of this chaos and beauty and love, was exactly what she planned. The city lights blurred through tears Elara hadn't realized were falling. But they weren't sad tears. They were the tears of someone who'd survived darkness and found light on the other side. Someone who'd gambled everything on a fake marriage and won something real. Someone who'd learned that the most powerful love stories aren't born from perfect circumstances or fairy tale romance. They're born from two people who look at each other in the wreckage of impossible situations and decide to build something better. Together. Always together. And that was enough. That was everything. 5 years after the courthouse wedding, the contract officially expired. Neither of them mentioned divorce. Instead, they spent that anniversary morning making pancakes with Minseo while their son, 9 months old and already trying to walk, babbled happily in his high chair. The Seokong Empire had been restructured completely. The criminal elements had been purged. The legitimate businesses were thriving. Joon had become the kind of leader his grandmother had hoped for. Someone who wielded power with compassion, who prioritized people over profit, who understood that real legacy wasn't measured in money but in positive change. And every single day he chose love over everything else. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the penthouse was quiet, Elara found Joon in his office staring at their marriage certificate. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different everything would be if I hadn't called you that night." "Don't." Elara crossed the room and took the certificate from his hands. "Don't think about alternate timelines. This is the one that matters. This one right here." "I know. Joon pulled her into his lap. "I'm grateful. That's all. For everything." Elara kissed him softly. "Me too." They sat like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, listening to Seoul breathe outside their windows. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they'd built from desperation and fake contracts and 13 years of unspoken love, they both understood something profound. The most powerful love stories are not born from perfect timing. They are not born from ideal circumstances or fairy tale romance. They are born from surviving darkness together. From choosing each other when walking away would be easier. From building something real in the wreckage of impossible situations. And from understanding that love, real love, is not about possession or obligation or legal contracts. It's about standing beside someone and saying, "I choose you, today, tomorrow, every day after that, no matter what comes." That was their story, messy and complicated and absolutely real. And they wouldn't have changed a single moment.